Take a moment to get comfortable. This video is meant to play quietly in the background as you relax. We'll be exploring the Library of Alexandria, how it formed, how it worked, and how its influence slowly spread over time. When people today refer to the Library of Alexandria, they are usually referring to a set of connected institutions that developed in the city of Alexandria in Egypt during the Hellenistic period, beginning in the early rule of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Alexandria itself was founded by Alexander the Great in the late 4th century BCE, and after his death, it became the capital of the Ptolemaic kingdom under Ptolemy Isoter and his successors. These rulers governed a Greek-speaking court in Egypt, blending Macedonian and Greek traditions with existing Egyptian administrative systems and religious practices. The city of Alexandria was planned with a grid layout, major streets, royal quarters, and port facilities, and it became a major hub for trade and administration in the Eastern Mediterranean. In this setting, the Ptolemaic rulers established an institution known as the Mausoleum, or the Shrine of the Muses, which included what we now call the Library of Alexandria. The Mausoleum was conceived as a place where scholars could reside, work, and engage in study supported by royal patronage. The library formed part of this larger institution. It was not originally imagined as a separate building alone, but as a component of an organized scholarly community embedded in the royal quarter. The Ptolemies aimed to gather writings from across the Greek world and beyond, bringing together texts on many subjects and languages. The official language of court and scholarship was Greek, but the kingdom inherited a long tradition of Egyptian record-keeping and temple archives in the Egyptian language, written in hieroglyphic and demotic scripts, and there was contact with texts in other languages such as Hebrew, Aramaic, and later Latin. The first Ptolemies used their control over the port of Alexandria and their influence in other cities to accumulate scrolls. Ships docking at Alexandria reportedly had their books confiscated for copying, with the originals sometimes retained in Alexandria and copies returned to the owners. While some details are debated by modern historians and based on later sources, the general pattern is that the Ptolemaic state used its resources, wealth, and political connections to build a large collection of writings. This collection included works of literature, philosophy, science, history, and technical subjects. The library was not merely a passive storage place for these texts. It functioned within the Mausoleum as part of a larger research environment. Scholars, sometimes called philologists or grammarians, worked there to establish reliable versions of texts, to compare different manuscript traditions, to annotate works, and to create reference tools. The Mausoleum is often described as a kind of research institute. Scholars were housed and fed at public expense, receiving stipends, meals in a common dining room, and access to the collections. They formed a resident community. The environment was designed to encourage continuous study, writing, and discussion under the protection of the monarchy. Alexandria was centrally placed in a network of trade routes linking the Aegean, the Levant, North Africa, and the broader Mediterranean. Through these routes, texts from different regions could be acquired. The Ptolemies also established relationships with other cities that facilitated the transfer of books. A well-known example involves the borrowing of official Athenian copies of tragic plays for reproduction. Alexandria provided a large deposit in silver to guarantee their return, but ancient sources suggest that the original Athenian copies remained in Alexandria, with copies sent back. While the literal details may reflect later exaggeration, they illustrate the way royal privilege could be used to prioritize book acquisition. Within the library, scrolls were generally written in Greek on papyrus. Papyrus sheets were glued together to form long rolls, which were then wrapped and stored. Titles and sometimes short labels called silly boy were attached to the end of the roll to identify the work and its author. Because papyrus was subject to wear, copying was a central activity. Scribes and scholarly editors would prepare new copies by comparing multiple manuscripts, choosing readings, and producing what they regarded as a corrected version. This process contributed to the establishment of canonical texts of Homer, classical Attic tragedians, and many other authors. The library therefore did not simply accumulate writings, it transformed them through editing, classification, and recurrence of copying. Within the Mausian, the head of the library, often referred to as the librarian or chief scholar, held an important office. Callimachus of Cyrene, a poet and scholar, is associated with the development of a comprehensive catalog of the library's holdings known as the Pinaques. This catalog did not merely list titles, it organized works by author, genre, and sometimes included biographical data and brief descriptions. The Pinaques are lost, but references to them suggest that they represented a major step in library science, providing a structured index that allowed scholars to locate works and navigate an increasingly large collection. This cataloging practice turned a large accumulation of scrolls into a systematized resource. The scholars at Alexandria specialized in various subjects. Some worked on literary criticism and textual scholarship. Others studied mathematics, astronomy, geography, medicine, and natural philosophy. Euclid, though his exact connection to the Mausian is debated, is associated with Alexandria, and his elements became fundamental for later mathematics. Eratosthenes, who served as a chief librarian, measured the circumference of the Earth using observations of the sun at different latitudes, combining geometry with empirical measurement. Aristarchus proposed heliocentric models of the cosmos. Hierophilus and Erasistratus are linked with anatomical studies conducted in Alexandria, taking advantage of conditions in Hellenistic Egypt that allowed systematic observation and dissection. These examples show the diversity of research conducted within the Alexandrian environment, relying on the library as a repository of written knowledge and on the Mausian as an institutional framework. The relationship between Greek-speaking scholars and older Egyptian traditions was complex. The Ptolemaic kings presented themselves as pharaohs in Egyptian style, while maintaining Greek customs at court. Temples maintained their own archives of religious, administrative, and scientific texts in Egyptian language and script. Some collaboration existed, especially in fields like astronomy and calendrical studies, where Egyptian observations were long-standing. The creation of a new calendar under Ptolemy Roman III, which attempted to align the Egyptian solar year with a leap year system, illustrates the interplay between Greek scientific reasoning and Egyptian religious practice, although the reform was not fully accepted at the time. Over the centuries, the library's holdings included not only Greek works, but also translations from other languages. A notable example often linked with Alexandria is the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures, sometimes called the Septuagint. According to later accounts, this translation project was associated with the Ptolemaic court and perhaps the library, though details are uncertain and partly shaped by retrospective traditions. What is clear is that Alexandria, with its substantial Jewish population, became a center for the translation and transmission of Jewish texts into Greek, contributing to their circulation in the wider Hellenistic world. The library, as it functioned in this context, relied on a steady supply of papyrus from the Nile region, on trained scribes, on stable funding from the royal treasury, and on a system of cataloging and shelving that allowed scrolls to be stored and retrieved without excessive confusion. Shelving in the ancient sense may have consisted of wooden cupboards or pigeonhole-like compartments. Scrolls were grouped by subject and author so that scholars could locate them. The head librarian coordinated the acquisition of new works, the copying of older ones, and the maintenance of the catalog. The Ptolemaic state supported this system because it conferred prestige and served as a symbol of cultural leadership in the Greek world. As a result, the library became a reference point not only for scholars in residence, but also for those who corresponded from other cities, requesting copies or information. Over time, the concept of the library expanded to include a second associated collection, sometimes referred to as a daughter library, situated in the Serapeum, a temple dedicated to the syncretic deity Serapis. This secondary collection appears to have served a different but related function, perhaps housing duplicate copies or texts intended for broader use outside the immediate royal precinct. The Serapeum itself was a religious and cultural center where Greek and Egyptian elements were combined. The existence of collections in both the royal quarter and the Serapeum indicates that Alexandrian library activity was not confined to a single building, but was distributed across several spaces. Under the Ptolemies, especially the earlier rulers, there was a continuous effort to maintain and expand these facilities. Royal patronage was crucial. The stability of funding determined whether scholars could be supported, buildings maintained, and copying projects continued. When the monarchy was strong and revenues from agriculture, trade, and taxation were reliably collected, the Mausoleum and library could function at a high level. When the monarchy faced internal struggles, external wars, or fiscal pressures, support for scholarly institutions could weaken. The political environment of Hellenistic Egypt was not static. There were succession disputes, court intrigues, and conflicts with rival powers such as the Seleucid Empire. Military campaigns required resources and focus. During such times, the attention given to scholarly institutions could wane. This did not necessarily mean immediate closure or rapid decline, but it could mean fewer acquisitions, fewer copying projects, and reduced maintenance. Scholars might still reside in the Mausoleum, but conditions and support could gradually change. The flow of knowledge through Alexandria was multidirectional. Texts came from mainland Greece, Asia Minor, the Levant, and elsewhere. In return, Alexandrian scholars produced commentaries, new treatises, and edited editions that spread outward. Works written in Alexandria were copied and carried to other libraries, such as those in Pergamon, Rhodes, and later Rome. In this way, Alexandria functioned as both a receiver and a transmitter of written knowledge. Its impact on later scholarship is seen in the survival of certain standardized versions of texts, the spread of particular scientific and philosophical works, and the influence of its methods of classification and commentary. The methods used in Alexandria for organizing information set precedents. Scholars there developed distinctions between different types of texts, such as tragedy, comedy, lyric poetry, history, and philosophy. They developed terminology for textual criticism, marking suspect lines, variant readings, and interpolations. Marginal comments provided explanations of unusual words, references to earlier authors, and clarifications of mythological or historical contexts. This systematic approach turned the library into a working environment for the analysis and refinement of inherited literature. It also required sustained, repetitive labor. Copying and recopying texts was time-consuming and demanded attention to detail. Errors could occur at every stage, and part of the task of Alexandrian scholars was to reduce such errors by comparing multiple manuscripts. Over long periods, this work contributed to the stabilization of texts that remained in use for centuries. The Mausoleum itself is described in ancient sources as having features comparable to a philosophical school or religious foundation. It had a central walkway or arcade, living quarters, common dining facilities, and spaces for lectures and discussions. Scholars could live in relative security, with their material needs met, allowing them to focus on study. This institutional framework was unusual in the ancient world and depended heavily on monarchical support. The Ptolemaic rulers used this support to present themselves as benefactors of Greek culture and as heirs to earlier centers of learning. The location of the library within the broader city was also significant. Alexandria's royal quarter was connected to the harbor, administrative offices, and major temples. This put the library close to the centers of power, but somewhat removed from the daily life of the wider population. Access was likely restricted to scholars and officials rather than open to all residents. Texts were rare and valuable objects, so their handling was controlled. Nonetheless, the presence of a large community of foreigners, merchants, and visitors meant that ideas encountered in the library environment could circulate informally into other parts of the city and beyond. As the Hellenistic period advanced, other centers of learning emerged, creating a kind of competitive environment. Pergamon, for example, developed a significant library and a scholarly community under the Attalid kings. There are reports of a rivalry between Alexandria and Pergamon, including claims that the Ptolemies, seeking to maintain an edge in written materials, restricted the export of papyrus. Whether or not such specific claims are fully accurate, they indicate that books and scholars were seen as strategic resources. This competition encouraged the accumulation and production of texts in multiple locations, not only in Alexandria. The slow transformation of the library's status can be considered in relation to broader political developments. The Ptolemaic dynasty, initially strong, experienced periods of decline and civil strife. By the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE, the kingdom faced pressure from Rome and internal disputes over succession. As Roman influence grew, the political autonomy of the Ptolemies diminished. Roman involvement in Egyptian affairs became more direct, culminating in the annexation of Egypt as a Roman province after the defeat of Cleopatra Roman VII and Mark Antony. During these transitional periods, the support systems that had sustained the Mausoleum and library had to adapt to new conditions. Under Roman rule, Alexandria remained an important city, serving as a major port and the main source of grain for Rome. Roman authorities valued the city's economic and logistical role. They also interacted with its cultural and scholarly heritage. Some Roman emperors, such as Augustus and later Hadrian, visited or showed interest in Alexandria. However, Roman priorities differed from those of the Ptolemies. The Mausoleum, as an institution tied closely to royal patronage, had to be integrated into a new administrative framework. Funding, appointment of scholars, and the conditions of scholarly life were all subject to broader changes in governance. Over time, there is evidence that the original Mausoleum may have ceased to function in the same way, while other forms of scholarly activity continued in Alexandria. Educational practices shifted toward more decentralized models, with private teachers and smaller schools operating throughout the city. The large, centrally funded research institution of the early Hellenistic period gave way to a more diffuse arrangement. The library collections, or portions of them, likely persisted in various locations, including the Serapeum. The process of decline in terms of library holdings was not necessarily abrupt. Rather, it involved several gradual factors. Papyrus scrolls required careful storage and periodic copying to remain usable. If institutional support for routine maintenance and copying weakened, scrolls could deteriorate. Humidity, insects, mechanical wear, and accidents contributed to damage. In an environment where resources were increasingly allocated toward other priorities, fewer scrolls would be recopied. Over decades and centuries, this led to a gradual reduction in the usable corpus. Administrative changes also influenced cataloging and storage. As staff was reduced or redirected, the accuracy and completeness of the catalog would decline. Misplaced scrolls, mislabeling, and incomplete records would accumulate. The pinnaces, if maintained at all, would become less reliable as holdings shifted without proper documentation. This kind of bureaucratic erosion is typical in institutions that outlast their original funding and oversight structures. It does not produce a single visible moment of destruction, but it steadily weakens the system's capacity to preserve and transmit knowledge. Economic changes contributed as well. The Roman Empire experienced fluctuations in prosperity, taxation, and urban investment. When local elites or imperial officials chose to invest in other projects, public buildings could fall into partial disrepair. If roofs leaked or storage rooms were not properly maintained, scrolls could be exposed to damaging conditions. Repairs might be delayed, and in the meantime materials deteriorated. The library collections, whether in the royal quarter or in associated temples, were affected by these broad patterns of maintenance and neglect. Religious and cultural shifts also played a role. As Christianity gradually became a major presence in the Roman Empire, including in Alexandria, patterns of reading and teaching began to change. Christian communities developed their own scripts, codices, and collections, focusing on biblical texts and related commentaries. The codex format, which resembles the modern book, gradually replaced the scroll, offering practical advantages in terms of compactness and ease of reference. As attention and funding shifted toward Christian institutions, older collections of pagan literature and scientific works received less systematic support. This did not immediately eliminate them, but it altered their status. Some texts were integrated into Christian educational curricula, especially those considered useful for grammar, rhetoric, or philosophy. Others were copied less frequently and eventually fell out of use. The administrative structures of the late Roman and early Byzantine state managed many different priorities, such as defense, tax collection, and public order. Maintaining large collections of earlier literature was only one concern among many. When budgets were constrained, copying expensive texts that had relatively little immediate utility was often postponed or neglected. Gradually, this meant that certain works survived only in single copies or small clusters. If these few copies were lost, damaged, or not recopied, the text disappeared from the active tradition. Alexandria's role in the circulation of knowledge continued in various forms. Christian scholars, such as Origen, worked in the city in the early centuries CE and engaged with both biblical and classical texts. The city remained a center for theological debate and scriptural scholarship. However, the institutional continuity between the classical Mausian and later schools was partial rather than direct. The earlier system of royal patronage for a large research institute had given way to different arrangements shaped by church structures, local patronage, and imperial policy. The Serapeum, which housed a significant collection, continued to exist as a religious and cultural complex. Over time, tensions between different religious groups in Alexandria affected the status of such temples. When imperial policy shifted in favor of Christianity, traditional temples lost state support and legal protection. The Serapeum was eventually closed and its cult suppressed. In the process, any remaining library materials in the complex would have been at risk. Some scrolls may have been removed and repurposed, others left unstored, and some destroyed. This represented another stage in the gradual reduction of Alexandria's ancient book collections. As centuries passed, references to the original Mausian and its library became more distant. Later authors described it with a mixture of factual memory and idealization. They emphasized its large collections, famous scholars, and role in preserving Greek literature. At the same time, the practical mechanisms that had allowed it to function, such as regular funding, trained staff, and a stable political environment, had long since changed. The result was a situation in which the idea of the Library of Alexandria persisted as a symbol, while its material basis diminished. The transmission of texts that had once been housed there followed other routes. Works spread to libraries and scriptoria in Constantinople, Antioch, Rome, and later monastic centers. Copying continued in these places, often guided by changing curricula and interests. Some scientific and philosophical works were translated into Syriac and Arabic, entering the intellectual traditions of late antique and medieval Near Eastern societies. In this way, the intellectual impact of Alexandria continued, indirectly, through texts that had passed beyond its walls long before. Modern knowledge of the library is therefore based on a combination of ancient testimonies, surviving works that can be linked to Alexandrian scholarship, and later accounts. Many details remain uncertain, such as the exact size of the collections, the precise location and layout of the main building, and the full list of scholars associated with the institution. However, certain patterns are consistent. The library emerged in the context of a Hellenistic royal capital, closely tied to the Ptolemaic court. It functioned as part of the Mauseon, supporting a community of scholars who engaged in editing, commentary, and original research. Its holdings were multilingual and multidisciplinary, covering literature, science, philosophy, and practical knowledge. It relied on systematic cataloging, represented by Callimachus's Pinax, to manage a large number of scrolls. Over time, political shifts, administrative changes, economic constraints, religious transformations, and the physical fragility of papyrus all contributed to a slow, uneven decline in its ability to preserve and transmit its collections. The gradual nature of this process can be seen by considering specific aspects of library operation. Catalog maintenance, for example, depends on continuous updating. Each new acquisition, each loss, and each reclassification must be recorded to keep the catalog accurate. If such record-keeping slows, the catalog increasingly reflects an ideal or past state rather than the current reality. Scholars relying on it may find that listed works are missing, or that newly arrived texts are not yet integrated. Over decades, this gap between catalog and holdings grows. The catalog remains a testimony to former completeness, while the actual shelves reflect more limited resources. Similarly, the routine inspection and repair of storage areas is necessary to prevent gradual damage. If roofs, doors, and shelves are not maintained, environmental stresses accumulate. Pests may infest the storage rooms. Humidity may rise. If no one is tasked with monitoring conditions, these changes proceed quietly. Scrolls weaken, inks fade, and the act of unrolling and re-rolling becomes more likely to cause tears. When a scholar later seeks a particular work, they may encounter a damaged or partially legible copy. If no new copy is produced, the text has effectively moved closer to disappearance. Copying itself is a repetitive task that requires both skill and patience. When the institutional culture rewards such work and provides adequate staffing, even texts used infrequently can be preserved. When fewer scribes are available and more demands are placed on their time, choices must be made about which works to prioritize. Core texts for education and religious practice tend to receive priority. Less frequently read treatises may not. In this way, the scope of what is preserved narrows. Alexandria, as it transitioned from a Ptolemaic capital to a Roman metropolis and later a center of Christian learning, experienced this kind of narrowing, with corresponding changes in the content of its libraries. The flow of knowledge between civilizations both mitigated and reshaped this process. Greek works studied in Alexandria spread to other centers. Egyptian astronomical observations and calendrical methods influenced Greek and later Roman science. Jewish scriptures translated into Greek in Alexandria influenced Christian theology and liturgy. Later, Greek philosophical and scientific texts transmitted through Alexandria and other cities were translated into Syriac and Arabic, contributing to the development of Islamic science and philosophy. In each of these transitions, selections were made, and certain works gained prominence while others did not. The Library of Alexandria played a significant early role in concentrating and systematizing texts, but its collections were part of a much larger and evolving network. Within the city itself, scholarly life continued to adapt. As Roman and later Byzantine administrators reorganized provincial governance, they altered funding mechanisms for public institutions. City councils, wealthy benefactors, and church authorities took on roles that had previously belonged to the Ptolemaic kings. Schools became more dependent on private patronage and ecclesiastical structures. The large, centrally funded Mausoleum was less suited to this new environment. Yet intellectual activity persisted in smaller units, such as local schools of rhetoric, philosophical circles, and church-based study groups. The idea of a comprehensive, state-supported collection of all knowledge gave way to more specialized libraries serving particular communities. The memory of the older institution, however, remained in literary references and scholarly tradition. In discussing Alexandrian scholarship, it is also relevant to consider the specific disciplines practiced there and how they used the library's resources. In grammar and philology, scholars like Xenodotus, Aristophanes of Byzantium, and Aristarchus focused on establishing authoritative texts of Homer and other canonical authors. They compared manuscripts, analyzed language, and proposed systematic punctuation and accentuation. Their work influenced how Greek literature was read, taught, and transmitted, and many later manuscripts reflect their editorial decisions. In geography, Eratosthenes compiled data on distances, place names, and regional characteristics, integrating information from travel reports, earlier writings, and administrative records. His estimation of the Earth's circumference, though based on approximate distances and angles, showed how carefully compiled textual and observational data could be combined. The library supported such work by providing access to earlier accounts and reports. In astronomy, scholars drew on both Greek and Babylonian traditions, as well as Egyptian observational records. The blending of these streams in Alexandria contributed to more systematic models of planetary motion and to more precise calendars. The library's role was to make earlier discoveries and records accessible, allowing scholars to compare and evaluate them. In medicine and anatomy, figures associated with Alexandria drew upon both textual traditions and direct observation. Earlier Hippocratic writings, treatises by philosophers on the nature of the body, and Egyptian medical records all formed part of the textual background. Hierophilus and Erasistratus, for example, are remembered in later sources for their anatomical investigations, which reportedly included systematic dissections and perhaps even vivisection. They distinguished between different types of nerves, studied the structure of the brain, and offered accounts of the circulatory and nervous systems that went beyond earlier Greek medical authors. Whether every detail reported later is accurate or embellished, the general picture is of a setting in which the written record and hands-on inquiry intersected. The library offered access to earlier theories. The city, with its hospitals and facilities, offered opportunities for observation. Scholars moved between reading rooms, lecture spaces, and areas where practical work could be carried out, linking text to practice. For the scholars who lived and worked in this environment, the rhythms of daily life would have been shaped by these overlapping activities. You can imagine, as you drift further into relaxation, how the day might begin in the Mausian. The sun rises over the eastern horizon, light reflecting off the waters of the Mediterranean. In the royal quarter of Alexandria, within high walls and colonnaded courtyards, the Mausian slowly comes to life. The air is still cool. Marble floors hold the night's softness. In the peristyle garden, leaves rustle gently in the faint breeze that carries a hint of salt from the harbor. A young scholar wakes in his small chamber, the pale stone walls bathed in the first diffused light. A narrow bed, a simple chest, a low table. The room is modest, but it is part of a privileged world. He rises, washes, and steps out into the corridor. The building is quiet. A few others move silently, nodding greetings. No one rushes. The Mausian exists outside the urgency of the marketplace. Time here is measured not by street vendors' cries, but by the progress of reading and the slow advance of thought. They walk toward the common dining hall. Long wooden tables, benches polished by use, clay cups, and simple plates. The food is plain but sufficient. Bread, olives, cheese, perhaps some figs or dates, sometimes fish. Scholars take their places, conversation beginning in low tones. News from other cities, rumors of political disputes, and, more often, questions about texts. A newly arrived manuscript of a playwright, a fragment of a lost historian, a medical treatise from Asia Minor. The meal is not hurried. It is part of the structure that binds the community together. After breakfast, the scholars disperse. Some move toward lecture spaces, where a senior figure may be giving a talk on a difficult passage of Homer or reviewing the geometry of conic sections. Others head toward the areas where scrolls are kept and study spaces arranged. To reach the library proper, one passes beneath porticos lined with columns, the sound of footsteps echoing softly, the air still shaded and cool. The city outside grows louder as day advances, carts on stone streets, shouts in the harbor, but here the sounds are muted. Inside the storage rooms, rows of wooden cupboards and niches hold scrolls, each carefully labeled. The smell of papyrus, glue, and ink mingles with the faint scent of oiled wood. Attendants move quietly, accustomed to the delicate work of retrieving and replacing rolls. The librarian or his assistants oversee the space, aware of where each category of text is kept: tragedy in one area, comedy in another, histories, medical texts, philosophical treatises, works on mathematics and astronomy, and many more. The catalog, compiled and expanded over years, guides their movements. A scholar approaches an attendant and requests a text. Perhaps it is a copy of an earlier philosopher or a collection of lyric poetry. The attendant consults his mental map, disappears briefly among the cupboards, and returns with the requested scroll. The scholar carries it with care to a nearby bench, where the light is sufficient but not too harsh, where a simple stand or cushion supports the roll while he reads. Unrolling a scroll is itself a deliberate act. One holds it with both hands, allowing part of the text to be exposed while the rest remains rolled. The eyes follow the columns of script, the hands slowly unrolling with one side while rolling up with the other. It is a physical engagement with text, its pace naturally measured. Marginal notes by earlier scholars may appear in small, precise letters at the edge of the main writing. Symbols mark passages of interest or uncertainty. Variants of particular words can be indicated, offering a glimpse into the history of the text transmission. In one corner, a group of scholars works together over several copies of the same work. They are engaged in textual criticism, comparing differences between manuscripts. One copy reads a line in one way, Another preserves a slightly different wording. They discuss which version seems more plausible, which fits the meter, which matches the author's usual style. They note references in earlier writers, cross-checking citations. As they debate, they make annotations that will guide the creation of a new, corrected copy. This is slow work, requiring attention and patience. It is also collaborative. Voices remain low, but ideas move back and forth, refined through dialogue. Nearby, a mathematician sits with a wax tablet, stylus in hand, pausing occasionally to look back at a scroll of geometric propositions. He draws figures carefully, triangles, circles, intersecting lines, making notes in shorthand. He considers how to explain not only a proof, but also its underlying assumptions. Perhaps he is preparing a commentary or a set of annotations that will help students grasp a complex argument. The library supplies him with earlier treatises, commentaries by predecessors, and reports of measurements or problems from other cities. The hours pass in this way, with the quiet rustle of papyrus, the scratch of stylus on wax, the occasional murmur of question and reply. Light moves slowly across the floor and walls as the sun climbs. Outside, Alexandria's harbor fills with ships, merchant vessels bringing grain, wine, oil, timber, papyrus, foreign ambassadors arriving to negotiate, travelers from distant regions bearing news and sometimes books. From time to time, a royal official might visit the Mauseon to confer with the head librarian about new acquisitions. Perhaps a ship from Athens or Rhodes has brought a trunk of texts to be examined and, if suitable, copied. Perhaps an envoy from a Greek city has sent a gift of manuscripts in search of favor or alliance. These exchanges underline the connection between the library's intellectual activities and the wider political landscape. Books move along the same routes as goods and armies. Knowledge and power intertwine. As midday approaches, the scholars gather again for a common meal. The light is stronger now, heat beginning to accumulate in the courtyards, but within the halls the stone still holds coolness. Conversation at lunch may return to the morning's work. A newly discovered reading in a famous poem, a question about a celestial phenomenon observed in the night sky, a puzzling medical case recounted from a local physician. Senior scholars and younger residents sit together. While social hierarchies exist, the shared commitment to study blurs some distinctions. After the meal, some rest briefly. Others walk in the shaded gardens where plants from different regions grow, Egyptian lilies, Greek olive trees, imported shrubs. The garden itself is a space for reflection. The sound of water in a fountain, the play of light through leaves, the distant cries from the harbor, all create a gentle background against which thoughts can settle. Some scholars use this time to recite poetry quietly, training their memory. Others review notes in their minds, shaping arguments for future treatises. In the afternoon, lectures and discussions resume. A visiting scholar from another city gives a talk on the interpretation of a poetic image, or on the uses of a particular herb in medicine, or on a new approach to calculating planetary positions. The audience listens, occasionally interjecting questions. The speaker refers to texts available in the library, weaving together lines from Homer, Hesiod, or Pindar with observations about nature, history, or technique. Meanwhile, in another part of the complex, scribes work steadily. They sit at long tables, each with a scroll to copy, ink, pens, and a supply of prepared papyrus sheets. The room is well lit, though not exposed to direct sun for extended periods, to protect both materials and eyes. The scribe's task is repetitive, but it is vital. Each letter must be formed clearly, each word checked. When uncertain, they consult with a supervising scholar who can clarify an unclear passage or decide between variants. Over time, they produce new copies that will replace worn scrolls or be sent to other cities. The library thus not only preserves texts, but also serves as a center for their multiplication and dissemination. The head librarian moves through these spaces, attentive to many details at once. He monitors ongoing copying projects, considers which texts should be prioritized, reviews lists of recently arrived works, and coordinates with scribes and scholars. At times, he consults the catalog, the Pinakes or its successors, to verify whether a known author is adequately represented, whether there are gaps in a particular subject area, whether new acquisitions need to be integrated into the system. Maintaining order in the growing accumulation of scrolls demands both practical skill and a conceptual grasp of how knowledge is organized. As afternoon shades toward evening, the light softens. Some scholars continue reading in the fading illumination. Others retire to their rooms or to quiet corners of the colonnades. The day's written work may be done, but thought continues, turning over problems, replaying arguments, imagining new questions. Dinner, like earlier meals, is taken together. The heat dissipates as the sun lowers, and a more relaxed atmosphere settles in. Someone recites verses from memory, perhaps lines of tragedy or lyrical poetry. Another responds with a brief epigram of their own. The interplay of memory, performance, and critique reinforces the shared culture that binds them. When night falls, oil lamps are lit in the corridors and rooms. Their soft, flickering glow is enough for simple tasks, for quiet conversation, for the reading of a short passage, but not ideal for extended study. The body follows the cycle of light and dark. Scholars retire earlier than they might in a world of brilliant artificial illumination. Outside, stars emerge in the sky above Alexandria, visible beyond the silhouette of the pharaoh's lighthouse, whose own beacon turns slowly. Somewhere in the city, an astronomer notes their positions, linking observational records to the mathematical models refined in part through texts available in the library. In this daily rhythm, repeated over years and decades, the Library of Alexandria and the Mausoleum as a whole created an environment in which knowledge could be accumulated, debated, and transformed. Each day's reading, copying, and discussion built upon the previous day's work, extending chains of interpretation that linked present scholars to their predecessors. The library was not a static monument but a living organism, dependent on the health of the broader society that nourished it. Over the generations, that broader society changed. Political fortunes rose and fell. Rulers came to power with different priorities. Some saw the value of supporting scholars and expanding collections. Others focused on military or fiscal concerns. Yet for much of its existence, the institution managed to adapt, absorbing new influences even as it preserved older traditions. You can imagine now how the library spaces themselves might have evolved. Early on, rooms were perhaps relatively simple: wooden shelving, basic tables, modest decorative elements. As wealth and ambition grew, expansions were added. New rooms, new courtyards, more elaborate porticos. Statues of muses or of famous poets and philosophers might be placed in prominent positions, honoring the intellectual lineages the library sought to embody. In the Serapeum, the daughter library would have blended this Hellenistic scholarly aesthetic with Egyptian architectural forms. Tall columns, broad stairways, and ornate cult statues coexisted with cupboards of scrolls, reminding visitors that religious and intellectual life were intertwined. In the Serapeum, the atmosphere might have been slightly different from the royal quarter, more accessible to a broader range of visitors, more integrated into the city's public religious festivals. Pilgrims coming to venerate Serapis could be aware, at least indirectly, that within these precincts knowledge was stored: stories of distant lands, accounts of rituals, treatises on astrology, theological works, and philosophical dialogues. The temple's high, cool halls might echo differently from the more intimate spaces of the Mausoleum. Incense could mingle with the smell of papyrus. Chants and prayers might occasionally be heard alongside more prosaic scholarly conversations. The existence of these multiple spaces meant that the Library of Alexandria was never just a single building or room. It was, instead, a network of rooms, shelves, tables, and human minds. It extended along corridors and across courtyards, into the memories of scholars and the notebooks of scribes, out through the port in the form of copied scrolls sent to other cities. Its identity was as much social as architectural. As you picture this network, your own mind is slowly tracing its outlines, moving gently from room to room, from century to century. The details are soft, as in a dream. You may not see every wall clearly, but you sense the structure, its calm persistence through time. Now, as time moves forward in this mental journey, imagine the subtle beginnings of change. The early Ptolemies are gone. Later kings face new pressures. The once clear lines of succession blur into rivalries. Armies march in regions not far from Egypt. Elsewhere in the Mediterranean, Rome is rising, first as a regional power, then as an empire whose influence spreads steadily. Inside the library, these changes may first appear only as faint disturbances. Funds for new acquisitions might arrive less regularly. Repairs to roofs or walls might be postponed. Salaries for certain positions might be reduced or delayed. Scholars might notice that certain projects once readily approved now require negotiation. Yet daily routines continue. Scrolls are still fetched, commentaries still written. It is in the nature of long-lived institutions that the early stages of decline can feel like mere irregularities in a pattern that seems fundamentally stable. At the same time, intellectual life elsewhere in the Mediterranean is flourishing in new ways. In Pergamon, a royal library grows. In Rhodes, schools of rhetoric attract students. In Rome and its expanding territories, Greek texts are increasingly in demand. Roman elites learn Greek, collect scrolls, and invite Greek scholars to their households. The center of gravity is not shifting all at once, but a more polycentric world of learning is emerging. Alexandria remains central, but it is no longer alone. This diffusion of scholarly activity has two sides. On one hand, it reduces Alexandria's monopoly. On the other, it ensures that texts first stabilized or cataloged there find homes in other cities. The loss or weakening of one library, in this broader context, does not necessarily mean the disappearance of all its knowledge. Many works have already begun to circulate widely. Within Alexandria itself, under Roman rule, new forms of organization take shape. The Mausoleum may be restructured or partially dissolved as an official entity, but teaching and research continue in new venues. Private patronage, municipal funding, and later church support create smaller but still significant centers of learning. Christian scholars, such as Origen and his successors, developed their own libraries and schools, drawing on both biblical texts and classical literature. The continuity between the old Mausoleum and these new institutions is incomplete, but lines of influence remain. In this phase, you might imagine walking through Alexandria's streets, away from the royal quarter. The city's layout, with its broad main avenues intersecting at right angles, remains imposing. Colonnaded streets provide shade, while behind them markets and workshops hum with activity. Greek, Egyptian, Latin, and other languages are heard. Citizens of different faiths and backgrounds pass each other. Adherents of traditional Egyptian cults, Greek polytheists, Jews, Christians, and others. Somewhere inside this urban fabric, a smaller library now occupies a space that is more modest than the Great Mausoleum but still important. Its rooms are lined with shelves containing both scrolls and codices, for by now the codex, the bound book format, is becoming more common. A Christian teacher may stand before a group of students, reading from a scriptural text, then referencing a passage from Homer or a philosophical dialogue to illustrate a point. The library's holdings reflect this mixed curriculum. Works once central to purely Hellenistic education now coexist with, and sometimes yield priority to, texts considered essential for Christian instruction. Meanwhile, in the Serapeum, the older library collections persist amid the rituals of a cult that is facing increasing legal and social pressures. The temple complex still stands, its great stairway leading up to a platform from which one can look out over the city. The statue of Serapis, combining aspects of Greek and Egyptian religious iconography, remains an object of veneration. In surrounding rooms, cupboards of scrolls and chests of tablets and codices still occupy space. But the number of priests, attendants, and scholars moving among them may be decreasing. Without steady patronage and a clear institutional mandate, the work of cataloging, copying, and conserving loses some of its force. Over years and decades, neglect can be as effective as deliberate destruction. A roof that once was promptly repaired after a storm now leaks periodically. Wooden shelves once polished and treated against insects begin to crack. Scrolls that should have been recopied are left untouched. Some may be moved haphazardly to make room for other activities. Others may simply remain where they are, gradually becoming more fragile. Dust accumulates, then moisture. Insects find their way in. Each small change is unnoticed in the moment, but across generations the cumulative effect is profound. In parallel, the intellectual network of the wider world is evolving. In Syria, Mesopotamia, and farther east, Syriac-speaking Christian scholars collect and translate works. Later, in the early centuries of the Islamic world, scholars in cities like Baghdad, Basra, and Cairo will gather Greek texts, often via Syriac intermediaries, and translate them into Arabic. Many of these Greek works were standardized or edited in Alexandria centuries earlier, but by the time of their Arabic translations, they arrive through other channels. Copies from other libraries, manuscripts that have survived in private collections, or texts preserved in Constantinople. Thus, when people in later ages think of the loss of the Library of Alexandria, they may imagine a single catastrophe. Stories have been told of fires and sudden destruction, some dramatized in later narratives. However, the historical reality appears far more gradual and complex. Multiple episodes of damage likely occurred. Civil conflicts, street fighting, accidents, temple closures, and eruptions of religious or political violence could each have affected parts of the library's holdings at different times. But at least as important as any dramatic event was the slow process of reduced maintenance, shifting priorities, and the natural decay of materials that are fragile by nature. Imagine, again, the scrolls themselves. Each one is a physical object made of papyrus, layers of plant fiber pressed and dried, coated with ink that bonds imperfectly to the surface. Exposure to fluctuations in humidity weakens the fibers. Repeated rolling and unrolling stresses the edges. Without careful handling, small tears appear. Without timely copying, a damaged scroll cannot be easily replaced. Over centuries, even the best stored papyrus will eventually deteriorate unless it is maintained and recopied onto new material. The preservation of texts in antiquity was always labor-intensive and precarious. In a thriving institution with adequate funding, this fragility is managed. In a strained or neglected one, it is not. Each generation must decide which works to copy and which to let go. In a changing cultural and religious environment, these decisions are guided by new values. For Christian educators, Certain classical texts remain useful for teaching language and rhetoric. Others may be considered less relevant or even problematic. For administrators facing military threats and economic pressures, the allocation of resources to copying rare scientific treatises may seem less urgent than other demands. The chain of copying, which alone ensures the survival of a title, can be broken by something as mundane as a budget shortfall, a shortage of skilled scribes, or a lack of interest. At some point, the Serapeum status changes decisively. Imperial policy, increasingly aligned with Christian orthodoxy, moves against traditional cults. Temples are closed, their property confiscated or repurposed. In Alexandria, this process is tense and sometimes violent. When Christian authorities and groups of believers move against the Serapeum, the temple's religious functions cease. In the turmoil, stored objects, statues, ritual items, artworks, and scrolls are at risk. Some may be seized and destroyed. Others may be taken as curiosities, scattered into private hands. Still others might simply be left behind in a building that now lacks regular oversight. If you imagine entering the Serapeum's former library rooms after such an event, you might see cupboards askew, some opened and emptied, others still partly full. A few scrolls lie on the floor, trampled or water-damaged. Rats and insects begin to colonize the quiet, undisturbed space. Without people regularly moving through, dust thickens. The air grows stagnant. Sunlight, once controlled for preservation, may now pour through broken windows or doorways, accelerating deterioration. In this disorder, the distinction between texts that survived and texts that did not becomes a matter of chance. It is not necessary to picture a single day on which the entire Library of Alexandria was destroyed. Instead, imagine a long, uneven process in which different segments of the library's holdings suffered different fates at different times. Some scrolls burned in localized fires. Some decayed slowly on neglected shelves. Some were carried off to other cities and survived there for centuries. Some were copied into new formats and languages, transforming in the process. The end of the library, in this sense, is not a discrete moment but a drawn-out fading, overlapping with the emergence of other centers of learning that inherited portions of its legacy. While this fading occurred, the memory of the library began to shift. Writers who lived generations after its peak had to rely on earlier accounts and on fragments of institutional memory. They heard stories of great scholars and vast collections, of kings who spared no expense to acquire books, of careful catalogers who could locate any text by author and subject. They also knew that such an institution no longer existed in their own time in anything like its original form. As a result, descriptions of the library grew more idealized, combining historical details with a sense of nostalgia. The library became not only a physical place but a symbol, a representation of a time when knowledge seemed to be gathered under one roof, when it appeared possible, at least in imagination, to collect all written wisdom. This symbolic dimension has been especially powerful in modern times. When people today speak of the Library of Alexandria, they are often less interested in reconstructing every technical detail of its organization than in reflecting on what it represents. A concentration of learning, a cosmopolitan environment of multilingual scholarship, and a reminder of the fragility of cultural memory. The library stands for the idea that knowledge can be systematically pursued and preserved, and for the recognition that such efforts are always vulnerable to political, economic, and material disruptions. Around the edges of this story, other quiet details gather. You might imagine the long, dim halls where those scrolls once rested, not as dramatic ruins, but as working spaces filled with the ordinary sounds of daily care. The soft footfalls of attendants. The faint crackle of papyrus as a roll is gently opened. the whisper of reed pens skimming across new sheets, copying line after line with patient repetition. There is nothing hurried in this scene. Scholars lean over tables, comparing words, noting variations, adding brief comments in the margins. A catalog keeper adjusts a list, updating where a particular work can be found. Outside, the city moves according to its own rhythm, traders' calls, water carried in clay jars, the distant sound of the harbor. Inside, the work of preservation continues at a slower tempo, attentive but unhurried. Over generations, those same halls change. New rulers bring new priorities. Rooms are repurposed, shelves rearranged. Some collections are moved, others quietly boxed away. A new language becomes more common in the streets and gradually in the texts themselves. Old works are translated or summarized, reshaped to fit new needs. A few are set aside as curiosities, valued but rarely consulted. Others are copied so often that the original version fades into the background, replaced by newer, slightly altered forms. This, too, is part of the thinning, not a single break, but a series of small adjustments. A teacher chooses one text instead of another. A scribe decides which scroll to copy during a limited season of work. A patron funds a particular project while leaving another unfunded. None of these choices feels decisive at the time. Each one is just a practical response to a particular moment. Together, over centuries, they reshape what survives. If you picture that slow reshaping as a long shoreline, you can imagine certain works as stones left near the water's edge. Tides of attention wash in and out. Popular interest rises, then recedes. Some texts are carried farther inland, sheltered and protected in new collections and new languages. Others are worn down where they lie, their edges softened until they blend back into the sand. No storm is required, just time and the gentle, repeating motion of use and neglect. Meanwhile, far from Alexandria, other rooms fill with other books. In monastic scriptoria, where daylight is precious and candles are used carefully, hands move steadily across parchment. Here, a work once known in the city by the sea appears again, now in a different script, sometimes in a different language entirely. A monk copies a passage on astronomy or medicine or philosophy without ever hearing the name of the place where that text was first collected. The idea travels, even when its origin does not. In those later rooms, priorities are different. Religious texts stand at the center. Around them gather commentaries, treatises, and selected works from earlier traditions. A few authors from Alexandria and its world remain present, woven into new frameworks of meaning. Others vanish quietly, not because they were disliked, but because they no longer fit into the now limited space of what can realistically be copied and stored. This pattern repeats itself in many cultures. In imperial courts, in private libraries of wealthy households and early universities, collections form and reform. Each time, compilers make choices. They preserve what they consider useful, beautiful, authoritative, or relevant. They let other things drift away. And over, certain methods, careful cataloging, comparison of different versions, organized storage, reappear. Sometimes without anyone consciously thinking back to Alexandria, yet still echoing its legacy. The result is not a straight line of inheritance, but a web. Threads of influence cross and recross. A work passed from Greek into Syriac, then into Arabic, might later return to Europe in Latin translation, bearing traces of each culture that tended it. A mathematician in one era comments on a text that originated centuries before in another land. A physician in a distant city refines a treatment described long ago on a scroll that may once have rested near the Nile. In each case, survival depends on repeated acts of care, to copy, to read, to store, to teach. These are quiet acts, often anonymous. Most of the people who made these decisions left no records of their names, Yet their choices shape what we now imagine when we think of ancient knowledge. At night, when you picture those long lines of transmission, you can almost see them as small candle flames, each one lighting a page for a little while before being extinguished, while another candle in another place picks up the same task. The physical objects change as well. The move from scroll to codex was not instantaneous. For a long time, both formats coexisted. Some readers preferred the familiarity of scrolls, their long, continuous flow. Others welcomed the convenience of bound pages, easier to navigate, easier to stack and shelve. A librarian in a later era might find it simpler to organize codices, to label their spines, to create indexes. Works that adapted to this new format gained an advantage, not through any inherent superiority, but because they fit more comfortably into the new systems of storage and use. You can imagine a particular work, perhaps a technical treatise on engineering or an early study of animals, sitting at the margin of these transitions. It may have been copied a few times, but not often enough to bridge the gap between scroll and codex, or between one cultural language and the next. It does not vanish in a single night. It simply appears less frequently in catalogs. Fewer teachers mention it. Eventually, no one requests it to be copied. The last copy wears out in some quiet corner. When that happens, there is no announcement. The loss passes unnoticed in its own time. Thinking of history this way softens it. Instead of sharp breaks, there are slow gradients. Instead of single points of disaster, there are extended periods of adaptation and drift. The mind, especially when preparing for sleep, can rest more easily with gradual change than with sudden catastrophe. The story of the Library of Alexandria, seen in this light, becomes less about one great burning and more about a long, complex process in which preservation and loss are intertwined. In the modern world, new versions of these processes unfold in digital form. Servers replace shelves, files replace scrolls, backups take the place of scribes, but the underlying conditions remain familiar. Information that is maintained, updated, and migrated to new formats tends to survive. Data left on outdated media or stored without care slowly becomes inaccessible. A lost password, an obsolete file type, an unsupported system. These can function like humidity and insects did for papyrus. Subtle forces that, over time, separate us from what was once available. Digital abundance creates its own thinnings. So much can be stored that attention becomes the limiting factor. Documents not opened for years, websites no longer visited, projects abandoned halfway. These form a kind of quiet digital sediment, layered but rarely disturbed. Some of it will be rediscovered later, perhaps by historians of the future. Much of it will simply remain dormant until the hardware that holds it is discarded or fails. In that sense, every era has its own version of Alexandria. Not a single place, but a pattern. The gathering of knowledge into structures designed to keep it usable. Card catalogs and metadata fields echo ancient lists of works. Search algorithms perform, in their own rapid way, the tasks once handled by librarians walking between shelves. You move through these systems every day without needing to think about their deep history. The methods are still active. They have just changed their appearance. If you consider the library less as a building and more as a metaphor for these ongoing networks, its continuity becomes easier to see. Every time a teacher prepares a course, choosing which text to assign, they participate in that same selection process. Every time someone scans an old book, preserving it in a new format, they act in a role that an Alexandrian scribe would recognize. Every time a reader recommends a work to a friend, they help carry one thread of knowledge forward. And, as always, other threads are allowed to rest. There is a quiet comfort in recognizing that no single decision you make tonight will end a story. The narratives of history, of culture, of learning are too widely distributed for that. They are held in many places by many minds. You are part of that pattern simply by listening, by allowing these ideas to pass through you and settle where they will, without force. As your body relaxes, you might imagine the sea near ancient Alexandria at dusk. The waters are calm. Ships move slowly in the harbor, some carrying goods, others carrying texts or people who carry memories of texts. Lights begin to glow along the shoreline. In the distance, perhaps, a beacon burns steadily, not urgently, just enough to guide ships towards safety. Inside the city, in rooms devoted to study, the day's work winds down. A scroll is rolled closed and tied with a thin strip of fiber. A list is updated with one last notation. A reader pauses at the end of a line, makes a small, careful mark, and lets the pen rest. Nothing dramatic happens. No great decision is made. Yet in that pause, in that ordinary completion of a task, continuity is carried a little farther. Far ahead in time, you rest in your own room listening. The contrast between your world and that one is vast, yet the underlying rhythms are not so different. Breath in, breath out. A series of thoughts unfolding, then quieting. A story told not to demand attention, but to gently occupy the space where restless thoughts might otherwise roam. You do not need to remember every example, every image. Like the works that pass through many hands, only some fragments will remain with you. A sense of gradual change, the image of scrolls and codices, the idea that knowledge is something tended rather than fixed. That is enough. If stray thoughts arise about your day, about unfinished tasks, about the future, you can let them drift into this longer timeline. Compared to centuries of slow preservation and gentle loss, a single day's worries become lighter. Not unimportant, but smaller, easier to hold. They take their place alongside many other small decisions humans have made, each one meaningful in its own way, none of them bearing the full weight of everything. The Library of Alexandria as an image often invites a kind of regret, the sense that something irreplaceable was taken all at once. Reframing it as a long, gradual thinning transforms that feeling. Instead of a sharp wound, there is a soft fading at the edges. Much was lost, yes, but much was also carried forward, through translations, through selections, through new institutions that, in their own times, functioned as centers of learning and preservation. And even the losses serve a quiet purpose in your thoughts tonight. They remind you that it is natural for details to blur, for memories to soften, for not every piece of information to be held tightly. Minds forget. Libraries reorganize. Files are archived. This is not failure. It is part of how complex systems remain livable. So, as you lie here, you can allow your own internal library to behave in the same way. Let certain thoughts move to the shelves where they can rest until needed. Let others drift away, unrecorded, without concern. You do not have to keep everything open and active. You do not have to reread every mental page. A gentle closing of the day's volumes is enough. Somewhere in the longer arc of human history, a scribe finishes a copy and sets it aside to dry. Somewhere else, a server completes a backup in the quiet hours of the night. Different tools, different times. The same underlying intention, to carry something forward into a tomorrow that has not yet arrived. You are not responsible for the whole chain. You are simply here at one small point along it, listening as the story stretches backward and forward beyond your own span. That perspective can be soothing. It loosens the grip of urgency. It makes room for rest. Outside your awareness, countless other processes continue. Clocks tick in distant rooms. Night deepens over cities and fields. Stars move slowly across the sky as they did above the roofs of Alexandria and above the monasteries and libraries that followed. The continuity of the world does not depend on your wakefulness. It does not require your constant attention. You can let go gradually the way history lets go, not in an instant but in a soft easing. Muscles settle. The breath finds a comfortable rhythm. Thoughts lose their sharp edges and begin to blur into images, then into quieter impressions. Maybe a hallway of shelves. Maybe the faint sound of pages turning. Maybe nothing in particular, just a sense of distance and calm. Knowledge in all its forms continues its journey without strain. It moves through languages, across formats from physical to digital and back again. It is never entirely safe and never entirely lost. It lives in a state of ongoing change, like a long conversation carried across generations. You do not need to manage that conversation tonight. You do not need to solve its mysteries or trace its routes. It is enough to know that the methods endure careful organization, shared learning, repeated acts of care, and that you, in listening, are briefly touching that enduring pattern. The story, like the past, does not stop where this telling pauses. It goes on in other places with other voices. For now, your part in it narrows to a single, simple action: to rest, while time continues to move at its own unhurried pace. Nothing more is required.